August 18th, 1969, 3:22 a.m. Chelsea Hotel, New York City. Bob Dylan was returning to his room from a late-night writing session when he heard something that made his blood run cold. From room 822, just down the hall from his own, came the sound of running water that had been going for hours, mixed with an eerie silence that felt wrong. Dylan had been staying at the Chelsea Hotel for 3 weeks, working on songs that would become New Morning, and he'd gotten used to the building's eccentric rhythms. But something about the constant sound of water from Jimi Hendrix's room, combined with the fact that he hadn't seen the guitar virtuoso in 2 days, filled Dylan with a dread he couldn't shake. What Dylan did in the next 20 minutes would save not just Jimi Hendrix's life, but preserve some of the most revolutionary music ever created. Dylan knocked on Jimmy's door. No answer. He knocked louder, calling out, "Jimmy, you okay in there, man?" Still nothing but the sound of running water. Dylan had 2 choices: mind his own business and assume everything was fine, or trust his instincts that something was terribly wrong. The decision he made changed rock history forever. Dylan went to the front desk and convinced the night clerk to give him a spare key, claiming he was worried about his friend. When Dylan opened the door to room 822, the scene that greeted him was like something from his worst nightmare. The hotel room was destroyed, furniture overturned, bottles scattered everywhere, the smell of vomit and something worse hanging in the air. But the most terrifying sight was the bathroom door, standing slightly ajar, with water flowing out from underneath it. Dylan pushed open the bathroom door and found Jimi Hendrix face down on the tile floor, unconscious, with the bathtub overflowing and water everywhere. Jimmy's skin was blue-gray, his breathing barely perceptible, and scattered around him were empty pill bottles and drug paraphernalia that told the story of a man who had finally pushed too far. Dylan's first instinct was to call an ambulance, but something stopped him. In 1969, a black rock star found overdosed in a hotel would mean headlines, jail time, career destruction, and possibly worse. Dylan knew that Jimmy's revolutionary music was just beginning to change the world, and he couldn't let it end like this. Instead, Dylan made the most important split-second decision of his life. He turned off the water, checked Jimmy's pulse, weak but present, and then did something extraordinary. He picked up the unconscious guitar legend, carried him down the hotel's back staircase, and drove him to his own private house in Greenwich Village. What happened over the next 3 days remained one of music's most closely guarded secrets for over 50 years. Dylan cleared out his guest bedroom and began a process that was part medical intervention, part spiritual healing, and part musical resurrection. He had no formal training in dealing with overdoses, but he had something more important: the determination to save a fellow artist, whose music he deeply respected. For the first 24 hours, Jimmy drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes coherent, sometimes delirious. Dylan stayed by his side, monitoring his breathing, forcing water and broth into him when he could keep it down, and playing quiet acoustic guitar to help ground Jimmy whenever he seemed to panic. "Bob?" Jimmy's voice was barely a whisper when he first recognized where he was. "Yeah, Jimmy. You're safe. You're at my place." Why didn't you take me to a hospital?" Dylan looked at Jimmy with eyes full of understanding and compassion. "Because I know what hospitals do to people like us when we're found in that condition, and because I believe you've got more music in you that the world needs to hear." Jimmy closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. "I don't know if I have any more music left, man. I feel empty, used up." "That's the drugs talking," Dylan said gently. The music doesn't leave you. It just gets buried under all the other noise. We're going to dig it out. Over the next 2 days, as Jimmy's physical condition stabilized, Dylan did something unprecedented. He conducted an intensive private intervention that was equal parts rehab and creative therapy. Dylan didn't lecture Jimmy about drugs or give him speeches about getting clean. Instead, he did something much more powerful. He reminded Jimmy why he had picked up a guitar in the first place. "Tell me about the first time you felt magic with a guitar," Dylan said on the second morning, as they sat in his living room and Jimmy managed to keep down his first real meal in days. Jimmy's eyes lit up for the first time since Dylan had found him. "I was maybe 15 in Seattle. I heard Muddy Waters on the radio, and I knew that's what I wanted to do with my life. Make people feel what I felt when I heard that music." "And when did you last feel that way about your own playing?" Dylan asked. Jimmy thought for a long moment. It's been months, man. Maybe longer. Everything became about the spectacle, the fame, living up to everyone's expectations of what Jimi Hendrix was supposed to be. I forgot about the magic." Dylan nodded. "I know that feeling. Fame can be a kind of prison if you let it be." On the third day, Dylan brought out his guitar and asked Jimmy if he felt like playing anything. "I don't know, Bob. My hands are still shaking. And I'm scared that if I pick up a guitar and nothing comes out, then nothing comes out," Dylan said simply. "And we sit here together until something does." What happened next became the stuff of legend among the few people who ever heard about it. Dylan began playing a simple blues progression. Nothing fancy, just 3 chords and the truth. After a few minutes, Jimmy picked up Dylan's spare acoustic guitar and began adding small flourishes, tiny improvisations that transformed Dylan's simple progression into something magical. For the first time in months, Jimmy's face showed genuine joy. "There it is," Dylan said softly. "The magic. It never left you." They played together for 6 hours that day, creating music that was unlike anything either had done before. Dylan's folk sensibilities mixed with Jimmy's psychedelic innovations produced sounds that were both ancient and futuristic. But the most important moment came when Jimmy put down his guitar and looked at Dylan with tears in his eyes. "Bob, you saved my life. Not just from the overdose. You reminded me who I am underneath all the bullshit." "What are you going to do now?" Dylan asked. "I'm going to get clean, really clean, and I'm going to make music that matters again." Dylan smiled. "Good, because the world needs what you have to give." That evening, as Jimmy prepared to leave Dylan's house and face the world again, Dylan gave him something that would change the course of his career. "I wrote this for you," Dylan said, handing Jimmy a piece of paper covered with lyrics. "It's called Voodoo Child. I think you'll know what to do with it." Jimmy read the lyrics, and his eyes widened. The words were unlike anything Dylan had written before. Psychedelic, mystical, perfectly suited to Jimmy's playing style. "Bob, this is incredible. But why are you giving it to me?" "Because I wrote it for your voice, not mine. And because sometimes the best way to save someone is to give them exactly what they need to save themselves." 3 weeks later, Jimi Hendrix recorded Voodoo Child, Slight Return with those Dylan lyrics, creating one of the most iconic rock songs of all time. The song's power and intensity reflected not just Jimmy's renewed connection to his music, but his gratitude for being given a second chance at life. But the secret collaboration between Dylan and Hendrix went deeper than just one song. During those 3 days of recovery, They had recorded hours of impromptu jams and conversations. Dylan kept the tapes locked away, honoring a promise he made to Jimmy that their private sessions would remain private until both men felt ready to share them with the world. Jimmy did get clean, at least for a while. The months following his near-death experience were some of the most creatively fertile of his career. He recorded Band of Gypsies, experimented with new sounds and approaches, and spoke frequently in interviews about the importance of staying connected to the spiritual core of music. In a 1970 interview, just months before his actual death, Jimmy said something that those close to Dylan recognized as a reference to those 3 days. Sometimes you need a friend who reminds you that music is bigger than fame, bigger than drugs, bigger than all the other noise. Someone saved my life once by reminding me why I started playing guitar. I'll never forget that. Tragically, Jimi Hendrix did die of an overdose just over a year later in London. But those who knew about Dylan's intervention believed that their 3 days together had given Jimmy enough clarity and purpose to create some of his most important work in his final year. At Jimmy's funeral, Dylan sat in the back, wearing dark glasses and saying nothing to the press. But those who watched him said he seemed to be carrying the weight of what might have been, the music that could have been created if he had been there for Jimmy's second overdose, the way he had been for the first. The tapes from those 3 days in Dylan's Greenwich Village home remained sealed for decades. But in 2019, on the 50th anniversary of the Chelsea Hotel incident, Dylan authorized the release of one track, a gentle acoustic version of Purple Haze that Jimmy had played while recovering. The recording is heartbreaking and beautiful. Jimmy's voice vulnerable and grateful, his guitar work stripped of all showmanship and filled with pure emotion. You can hear Dylan's voice in the background, offering quiet encouragement. That's it, man. That's the real magic. Music historians who have heard the full tapes say they contain some of the most intimate and powerful collaborations ever recorded. Two masters supporting each other through crisis and rediscovering together why music matters. The lesson of those 3 days wasn't about drugs or fame or the pressures of being a rock star. It was about what it means to truly help someone, not by judging them or lecturing them, but by reminding them of their own worth and giving them the space to find their way back to themselves. Dylan's decision not to call an ambulance that night was controversial among those who knew about it. But Dylan always maintained that sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone is believe in them when they can't believe in themselves. Jimmy needed to remember that he was more than his worst moment, Dylan said in a rare 2020 interview. He needed someone to remind him that his music mattered, that his life mattered, that he had something the world needed. Sometimes that's the only medicine that really works. The Chelsea Hotel still stands in New York City, and room 822 now bears a small plaque honoring Jimi Hendrix's time there. But there's no mention of what Dylan did that August night. No recognition of the intervention that saved one of rock's greatest talents. Perhaps that's as it should be. Some acts of heroism are meant to be quiet, private, known only to the people whose lives they touch. But every time someone hears Voodoo Child, every time they're moved by the raw power and spiritual depth of Jimmy's final recordings, they're experiencing the ripple effects of one friend refusing to let another friend drown. Bob Dylan found Jimi Hendrix dying in a hotel bathroom, and instead of calling for help, he became the help. For 3 days, he proved that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply believe in someone's potential for redemption. And sometimes, that's enough to save not just a life, but the music that life was meant to create. If this story moves you, Remember that everyone is fighting battles you know nothing about. Sometimes the difference between tragedy and triumph is one person willing to step in when someone else is drowning. You don't have to be Bob Dylan to save someone's life. You just have to care enough to act when it matters most. The greatest music often comes from the darkest places, but it takes friends, real friends, to help artists find their way back to the light.